Technology clearly came up in pretty much every panel and speech today as a driver of growth. And today, our panel will try and explore how we can harness these new technologies, how they in their individual roles are using technologies or thinking about technologies to drive growth and sustainable growth within their organizations. So let me quickly introduce my panel to you. I've got on my right, Maryse Gordon, Head of Business Development at RepRisk in the UK. Maryse has worked within financial services for over 18 years and gained a wealth of knowledge and experience ranging from product development, operations, and client management. We have then Prasad Chandrasheker, who's the Global Head of Emerging Technology Strategy at Fidelity International. Prasad is the Global Head, and since the start of 2020, he leads a multidisciplinary approach focusing on technology research to identify emerging trends, creating ecosystems for internal and external incubation of the research themes, and also investigates potential strategic partnerships for Fidelity International with fintechs and other major players. And then I have Elena Strbac, Global Head of Data Science and Innovation for Corporate, Commercial, and Institutional Banking at Standard Chartered. And she leads the bank in New Horizon capabilities in machine learning and quantum computing. So brilliant to have her here as well. Michalis Sotiropoulos, Executive Director and Head of Government Relations at Europe DTCC. Michalis is Head of the Brussels office at DTCC with responsibility for developing, managing and coordinating the firm's regulatory and policy strategy across the EMEA region. And he's one of DTCC's representatives on accelerated settlement, T+1, mandatory clearing, financial innovation, and operational resilience. And I know DTCC is a big player in terms of exploring new technologies. And lastly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Suchitra Nair. I'm a partner. I head up Deloitte's EMEA Center for Regulatory Strategy. We're effectively a think tank as well as a strategy design team made of ex-regulators and policy leads from industry. And we think about the impact of regulation and strategy, and innovation is one of the key themes that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So without further ado, I'm going to ask my panel some questions, but let's kick off with your perspective on new technologies and how they're shaping financial services and related professional services. We know that new and existing technologies will play a key role. It's currently playing a key role in shaping financial services, but what are the top 2 technologies that you think are going to be a game changer, and what are the opportunities, but also the challenges in deploying that? Maryse, would you like to go first?
Yes, I can do so. I mean, the perspective that I'm going to share is really focused on data and technology. So how do we marry the two together to provide services to end clients? And I can mention a couple of opportunities I see in that space, but also a couple of challenges that I see with that. So the first opportunity would be around the enhanced data processing capabilities. So with advancements in AI and machine learning, I think this allows for a lot of further developments when it comes to fine-tuning of large language models and domain-specific tasks. And with things like early utilization of transformer models, which are really there for the transformation of input data sequences to output data sequences, this gives us as a business the opportunity to analyze millions of documents on a daily basis. This allows us to look at different languages when it comes to input of information. And within that, the ability to identify key data patterns, which then subsequently allows for the identification of business conduct incidents or allegations against companies. So that's kind of core aspect of how we're looking at it. And we are an ESG data provider, so that's why we're specifically looking at that type of information. And I think the opportunities get bigger with the wider history that you have access to. So a lot of what we're doing, what's been happening in the past, allows for the aggregation of historical information. And you also have the ability to utilize capabilities that look at more in-depth type of analysis, looking at unstructured data, more diverse data sets. And that's really core input when it comes to qualitative and quantitative types of data assessments. So when you're able to consider those types of varieties, it allows for more in-depth analysis on certain types of risks, which is what we're looking at. So an example of an opportunity we were able to take advantage of was the incorporation of spatial analytics alongside things like asset level information, which allows for assessment of biodiversity risks or physical material impact risks as well. So that's one area of opportunity. The other would be in automation and efficiency. So by combining both AI and I think human intelligence, which is I think a powerful and important combination in this topic, it allows for the improvement of AI capabilities to remove routine tasks from analysts, so they get to work on more complex issues, which improves their efficiency and the effectiveness of those tools. And when you can then additionally look at generative text models, you're able to refine qualitative content generation workflows, and that allows for more faster and efficient data analysis. So those are a couple of the opportunities. The challenges, I think, stem from the investment in this space, but also integrity of information. So we are looking at wider data sets, and we are needing to really refine and keep up to date these complex models. And that comes with heavy investment, but you also need to maintain the integrity of information as you're going through that.
That's great. Prasad, can I come to you?
Sure. I think, Maryse, you've summarized quite a lot of the important points. I think it won't be any surprise that the two technologies that we typically talk about in this context would be centered around AI and blockchain. But maybe I'll just take a slightly generic stance on the opportunities that it provides. Quite a lot of these technologies, they kind of operate, you could use them to operate in one of two modes. One, is there an existing process that you're doing today that you're unable to scale with current methodologies that you can now use these new technologies to accelerate? And that involves quite a lot of the things that Maryse touched upon. It could be new sources of data, new ways of processing it, having more scale where humans may not have been able to do in the past. But then there is definitely a different type of opportunity where these technologies could potentially help you reimagine the business itself. You're used to doing certain things in a certain way because you've had the comfort of working within a certain framework for a period of time. But these new technologies are providing you with such power for your business processes. Is there an opportunity to totally reimagine the way the business needs to be done? Is everything that you did in the past absolutely essential any longer? Is there a different way you can achieve the same outcome? And do you have the frameworks and approaches to actually go achieve it? So therein comes in the challenge as well. As you start to disrupt these business models, things that you were obligated to do in the past do get challenged. And then you have to take half a step back and say, how much of those are real obligations and how much of those were because we designed a process in a certain way in the past? That dialogue then broadens it just beyond what the tech can do. It then brings in all the other support functions that we need. It's a cross-functional team at that stage. You need your risk, you need your legal, you need your compliance teams, you need your external public policy teams, because the narrative just broadens out at that stage. I suspect, there is one other kind of challenge that comes in, and it's not often talked about in the context of all the opportunities that new technologies give. And that's the human kind of base from which all of this is built. Do you have access to the human capital, the talent, the marketplace that can actually keep up with the demand that you have? Quite often, the biggest enemy to scale is that lack of scale and people that are able to work with these new technologies. I think quite a lot of time we hear it's a war on talent or war for talent. And yes, there is going to be a huge competition, but that competition can only be met if it addresses the issue from grassroots level. I think over time, we will probably require a lot more people with some of these capabilities, some of these skills. Yes, generative AI slightly democratizes the way in which you can access that, but it will only take you so far. It will allow you to be a better user of it, but if you have to be a creator of those models, you need a different kind of skill set. I'm sure, Elena, you will probably speak a little bit on that. But I think the challenges are we need to manage the demand that we have with the human talent that we can throw at it.
And not to mention the pressure on decision makers who have to upskill and make those investment calls, but also those structural changes in the organization. So real challenge from a human perspective as well. Yeah. Elena, great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So From my point of view, the two technologies, without a doubt, are AI and quantum. So AI is obviously a common one, but I'll just add my thoughts to that. So in the way that we're looking at it internally is, we're looking at how we can use AI to increase productivity. So this is about, how can banks create the AI-augmented relationship manager who has freed up time for higher value client interactions. And I do think that will, with the various AI tools that are becoming adopted, I do think that will become a new higher bar and new higher level of expectation. And the second area is how we can use AI to unlock our operational efficiencies. So this is effectively how we can use it to reduce the time to service that we provide to clients. And obviously from a bank's perspective, that also means reducing our time to revenue. And then the third opportunity, I think, for banks will be to understand how their clients' businesses are being affected by AI. So, for example, we have a large number of clients in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing is, without a doubt, going to be an area that is going to be highly disrupted by AI and automation, which means that our clients' businesses will change. So I think that is another opportunity, especially for banks who are able to best understand those changes and to be with their clients on that journey. So AI obviously doesn't come without its challenges. We've already talked about some of them. Just the ones that I want to reiterate are, there's obviously the bias component, which I think is well recognized. There's also, incidentally, a very good Netflix documentary about that called Coded Bias, which I would highly recommend. But there have been various studies that show how AI, when reviewing CVs, is biased towards certain demographics over others. So I think the challenges there are very clear. The second challenge, I would say, is user acceptance. So I think as humans, we don't always risk adjust well. And this can be seen through people being perhaps more scared of flying than driving, which statistically doesn't make sense, or the fact that we haven't yet got to a place of adopting self-driving cars, which again, statistically speaking, from the number of accidents caused by humans also doesn't make sense. So I think we're not yet there with the societal AI adoption, which is another challenge. And then the third one, which will lead me to quantum computing, is power. So as we are building these larger and larger AI models, these data centers are getting bigger and bigger. They are consuming more and more power, requiring more and more electricity, more power for cooling. There are also various statistics out there, like some of them say that AI is 100 times more power intensive than a Google search. Some say that in the next few years, AI will require as much energy as the entire of France. So there are various projections. But I think what's clear is that if we are going to be moving towards AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and artificial superintelligence, which is where AI becomes smarter than we are, it seems like the technologies we have at the moment are not going to be scalable, especially in an environment where we are all looking to move towards net zero. So it seems like there is likely to be a need for another type of technology, and this is what brings me to quantum, because, so actually I'll briefly introduce quantum. So a quantum computer is a specific type of computer which uses the principles of quantum physics, and it can, I know this is going to sound abstract, but it can be in multiple states at once, whereas a classical computer can be in one state at once. So we don't need to go into the physics details of that, but the main thing to know is that this property means that a quantum computer can potentially solve exponentially larger problems than classical. So this is where I think there might be an opportunity for quantum to solve some of the power challenges that we're facing. However, on the challenges side of quantum is that the technology isn't quite there yet. It's a technology which is very much in its adolescence, I would say. The timelines of when it will become, when it will get to the scale that we need are unknown. That's also debatable. Some say end of decade, some say sooner, some say 10, 20 years. Some people even say never. So that timeline is unknown. And then I think going back to your point about the talent and the skills required, I think that the barrier to entry for quantum, at least currently, is quite high.
Thank you. If you do have questions, please scan the QR code on your tables. I'm sure we'll attempt at least to tackle some of those. I mean, really great point about AI augmented human service, and we talked a lot about unlocking pension and retail savings and bringing down the cost of advice. So I'd like to come back to both of you at some, after we've done the round to really explore whether AI can power that conceptually, but also what might the barriers be. Michalis, if I could come to you, what do you think will shape financial services?
So I'll take you kind of more of a bird's eye view on that. I think, so at DTCC, we kind of combine the old and the new in a way. So I want to kind of bifurcate the answer, just say there are existing technologies that can be utilized better and more. And this is a combination of technologies. Some is like with mainframe and some cloud computing. And the second is clearly, the potential of tokenization, which I think, at least in wholesale financial markets, is something that is explored even further. You can't have a purpose outside of reality. So the concept of purpose exists within reality. And we always view technology as an enabler of processes, but we stand in, we do post-trade service, we offer solutions for post-trade, and that means that we need a wider adoption of the community. So it's the word ecosystem here that kind of matters. I'll just give two examples. We actually last month, we concluded a very long project on accelerating the settlement cycle in the US, which so far has been quite successful. And part of the success or the enabler of that process is actually automating and standardizing some solutions, how you connect actually the trading to the settlement component. That doesn't require technology per se, new technology. It just requires adoption of existing automated solutions. We had clients that used fax and emails, like a manual process, to exchange specific types of information. And we offered an electronic solution to that. So sometimes you need the old or the relatively new, let's say, to have some solutions. In the UK, there is a similar debate spearheaded by the UK's Accelerated Settlement Task Force, and some of these solutions are also promulgated there. And the second is clearly the advantages of tokenization. Again, DLT technology, blockchain technology is adolescent, I guess, but still there are benefits. And what we have seen there is a lot of potential, I would say large potential, especially in the markets that we operate. So DTCC clears and settles the securities market in the US. There are specific opportunities there. And I think there is a study per week that talks about the number of tokenization, the trillions of tokenized assets in the future. I think there are two challenges there. First of all is, depending on the asset class, we have to look at specific characteristics. And the second and most important as a challenge is that so far we have seen what is called, innovation by press release. Specific institutions partner with a tech company, do a POC, and then it's there. What can we learn out of that? A lot of lessons can be learned. What is happening afterwards? I don't know. So I think what needs to happen is this sort of end-to-end process. And this takes me to something that we may discuss later, and it's, I think, relevant to your points about AI standards. And I think the tokenization component, because you have these silos of liquidity, financial services right now have enough silos in a way. I don't think that we need to utilize new technologies to create further siloing. On the contrary, you need to create this sort of interoperable or links between those innovative projects so you can bring benefit to the entire ecosystem of the industry and the regulatory community alike.
That's tokenization. I mean, clearly it's caught fires in terms of the debate, and the Investment Management Association in the UK has come out with the blueprint for fund tokenization. And do you think, I mean, clearly the debate around distributed ledgers and the uptake of that has kind of hit a cost blocker. Will the industry commit the millions and the billions needed to transform capital markets or some of the existing well-functioning markets and move it to DLT? What's your sense? I mean, clearly the debate around DLT seems to be focused on tokenization. Can you see any other pockets in financial services where DLT may actually catch on? I know there's been so many attempts by industry to see whether we can push DLT or drive benefits out of it.
Yeah, there are clear opportunities. There are opportunities in the collateral space, in some of the wider spaces, and I think it depends on the firms who want to invest the capital, but it definitely takes time. It will not happen in a jiffy, it will not happen overnight. And I think the industry so far, including the post-trade sector, the financial market infrastructures, have spent a significant amount of time and pilots and exercises to learn lessons out of that. But it will definitely take time. And I think one of the key elements there is exactly that you need to insert the concept of collaborating. And we heard that several times in the past few panels. how do you collaborate and create some industry-wide solutions, be it by market infrastructure or some other disrupting company. But in our case, we have, for example, a concrete example of that would be we partner with Euroclear and Clearstream, and we develop some sort of principles that the digital asset security should abide by. And these are like more of a control principles. And we partner with two big FMIs, like CSDs on that space, just to develop something that kind of makes sense. And then we would like some other body to take on and develop standards around it. And if you have those standards, then everyone else can develop around those standards. And then it's easier for both the industry adoption and the regulatory licensing in the future. So you cannot do something just for the sake of doing that. Technology doesn't exist in itself. And just a final comment, in a way, and that's why I'm kind of my narrative of old and new, financial services innovates using existing technology from its inception. Part of the history of DTC is about how you use fax machine instead of having a guy with a scooter taking the papers around in Wall Street, right? So this was innovation in the 70s. Now we have, I think, a tremendous opportunity with especially the DLT technology, is really how we use them and what do we make out of that.
So do you think technology now will be used to improve processes and drive efficiencies within the existing frameworks and the way we do business rather than wholesale changes?
Yes.
Perfect. No, thank you. That's great. So that leads me on to my next question. I mean, clearly technology is going to be a tool for competitiveness, and we see around the world regulators, policymakers, governments trying to put themselves forward as the next, maybe the world's next AI hub or the next DLT leader. Where is UK in this race, especially around capital markets, and what more is needed to ensure our capital markets remain at the forefront globally? Why don't I stay with you?
Okay, the word race is a bit difficult for me to accept. It's more of a journey, to just be more poetic.
We're certainly going at the pace of a very leisurely journey.
Because in a journey, you kind of look at others and you look what others have learned and you kind of learn from others. I think that's why I would just frame it like that. I think the UK has done, and we heard that from the previous panel, the structure is pretty positively evolved. And even post-Brexit, if I may say, and that's a personal opinion, it has evolved in a very interesting way. I mean, I have spent most of my career in dealing with European Union laws, and that has always been challenging in some of the efficiency that this would bring. But I think the UK framework has three dimensions which I want to focus on. One is the operational resilience component. We cannot forget that everything has to happen in a resilient way. We're talking about stability here as well as growth, and you can have one without the other. So the OPRES framework that the FCA, the bank, and the PRA have put forward, I think, is a very positive framework, has been accepted as a positive framework by firms. It's flexible enough and adapts to any new technology in a way. I would venture to argue it adapts. So it doesn't really focus on just cloud as the original concept, I think, of like risk from third parties and others, but it could adapt to things like AI in the future. The second layer, I think, is that there is this tendency in the UK to create rules by task force, which is an interesting concept because it allows flexibility and market input before the adoption. The task force on accelerated settlement is an interesting one because it does deal with technology eventually, but also the UK digitization task force has some interesting ideas, which again marries the old and the new, tries to make some processes more efficient in the UK. There are some challenges there, I think, but the collaborative approach of the task force actually would bring a more beneficial outcome. And the third one, and the most, I think, quoted, is the sandbox, the digital sandbox, which would allow firms to do stuff that they couldn't necessarily do because they will have to disapply some part of the rules. And that's the element that it's a journey. The European Union adopted the DLT pilot regime, which I think arguably hasn't really picked up.
But there's not a single person in the pilot, a single firm that's signed up to the pilot from what I hear.
Yeah, and I can quote the ESMA letter that has 4 firms in the pipeline and 8 more as a... I think the issue is that whether the actual design was a successful design or not, and what does it mean. But again, then we run the risks of developing something in silos. So opening up these sandboxes in the future would actually be the value. What you learn through the sandbox in the EU, in the UK, potentially in other parts of the world. And then what do you make out of that? And that's why, going back to my previous point about standards and kind of sort of common approach to that. I think Catherine from before mentioned about if the EU and the UK have some common approaches to some common issues in markets that they share, they could develop some solutions there. I think the tokenization component is a definite element that could be a joint solution of sorts. Again, going back to my sort of more legacy piece, accelerated settlement is the same. The whole debate about that is whether the EU and the UK can join forces and have the same date for moving, the conversion of those processes to a shorter cycle. And I think this would be a very interesting set of examples of regulatory frameworks that actually work.
So,
if I just add to that, I think the point that you made about collaboration, I think that was very much evident when we did the paper that you referred to, Suchitra, on the tokenization thing that was done by the Investment Association. That was not an easy task. It brought together regulators and quite a lot of other financial services firms to come together to openly discuss what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, where we expect certain roadblocks, where we should start addressing some of those roadblocks. But what came out of that process was also an appreciation of where else in the world have they started looking at similar problems and have they started to solve those problems, and what we as an industry, as a sector, could learn by collaborating with them. So I think as an outcome of that paper at the time, there was recognition that legislations are a little bit different and further ahead in jurisdictions like Singapore, Dubai, and things like that. That was mainly around tokenization. There are things that we can learn from others as well. I think that collaborative approach is very much going to be necessary, especially for things like tokenization, which, to Michelle's point, I mean, we will require an ecosystem to adopt before the critical mass comes in. Otherwise, it will remain fairly fragmented, and integrating across fragmented things will kind of defeat the original purpose.
Indeed, I think global alignment, European, well, EU to UK alignment, I mean, they're all critical, isn't it? But not seeing that really very much from a regulatory perspective, whether it's MiCA or whether it's the EU Act. So some practical challenges from a regulatory perspective, isn't it, to navigate, which I'll come on to in a minute. But did you want to add anything in terms of how UK is faring in that race to be competitive? I know you're very involved in the kind of quantum world.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess looking across AI and quantum, I'll start with kind of across all sectors first before I get to financial services. There are various rankings and indices about, global AI and quantum leaders. Generally, UK tend to be around third or fourth. Typically, we've got the US and China are ahead, sometimes Singapore. For quantum specifically, there are other countries like Australia who are doing a lot, so the UK is sometimes below there as well, but usually around kind of third, fourth, fifth. And then if we look at what the UK are doing in those areas, it is actually very similar to the US and China who are ahead of us. So for example, in quantum, the government have released a national quantum computing strategy. They've announced 2.5 billion of investment in quantum. And similar again in AI, I think the government have already provided 2.5 billion of investment since 2014. So I think we're doing the right things as well, like fostering the public-private partnerships, supporting regulations which are pro-innovation, investing in startups, investing in research and development. So I think the UK are doing all of these things. We just don't quite have the scale of the US and China. And I personally don't think that is going to change. So I think that if we want to be number one, we need to do it in a different way. And I think that different way will be that societal adoption that I mentioned. So just as an example, I know that there are some concerns about will AI take over jobs? But the way that I see it, even at an individual level, is I don't think humans are going to be competing against machines. I think humans are going to be competing against AI-augmented humans, and I think that's going to be true for banks. I think banks are going to be competing against AI-augmented banks, and then economies, I think, is going to be the same. It's going to be economies competing against AI-augmented economies. So I think the UK does have the opportunity to be leading in that societal adoption. And I think the tools are already there. So for example, there are AI tools that help with, personalized financial management and helping individuals on micro savings, putting together a plan that is, manageable. But, are we really using these tools to help increase the financial resilience of UK households? I don't think we are. And the same in medicine, for example. There are already a number of AI products that, for kind of AI for medical use, but have we yet found a way to use them to really optimize, both public health and how we run the NHS, which obviously will have a knock-on effect on our economy, so I don't think we have. So I think that's where the main opportunity will be for the UK.
Did you want to come in?
No.
Right, okay. You talked about standards, and I think that plays a really important role to roll out some of these and for particular use cases. What about regulation? How can they be adapted to foster innovation while safeguarding integrity? We talked about competitiveness. Some people touched on growth in the previous panel. Any views on, could the regulators do anything at all? It could be don't do anything, because on AI, that seems to be the main theme in the UK. Don't fix something that's not broken.
See, I think, it's going to be a mix of everything. But one thing historically that we've kind of seen with regulators is they'll be a little slow to catch up with something that is totally new and emerging. One thing that I think we have all gotten used to now is the pace of change of some of these new technologies and the impact that they have is too high. So you cannot always be playing catch up. Maybe an approach would be that the regulators collaborate a lot more with the different sectors, different industries to understand what exactly is the opportunity and challenge with each one of them and build up that model more collaboratively right from the word go. It's almost like different organizations will have functions similar to what we have within Fidelity or other innovation functions and R&D functions, trying to understand what's coming down the horizon and trying to be a bit more preemptive in terms of what you can do before that horizon gets into the level of maturity where it starts getting practical use cases, getting integrated into day-to-day things. Could you do that slightly ahead of time? Could you start brainstorming what the art of possible could be if this matured beyond a certain level? I think that would be one way in which we could address that. Otherwise, it's like you allow for a little bit of the Wild West to develop for a short period of time, and then you come in with, oh, by the way, we had these guardrails, we had these other guardrails, and therefore this new one should perhaps have a combination of these two, and you start defining that. I think to Michelle's point from earlier, quite a lot of the initial thinking around AI were derived from cloud, third-party risk, so on and so forth, some from the traditional model risk perspective that was there, and then some that came from the ethics and ESG side of things. It's not that the foundations of those did not exist, but an early discourse on that would have meant that people would have probably joined these dots a little bit sooner, and that clarity of what you cannot do could have also happened a little bit earlier. There is always a balancing act here. Sometimes you're too soon and then you'll have to redo the whole thing. Sometimes you're too slow and then you'll have to kind of rush to catch up. But having the discipline of collaboration, early visibility into what the R&D pipelines look like across different sectors will just allow the regulators to be a little bit more proactive. They can actually respond instead of just reacting to something that's there.
And I think the FCA has tried to do that a little bit with their sandbox, isn't it? But of course, it's how many, getting people into the sandbox and the right new, the new technologies to come in so they can observe it, it will remain a bit of a challenge.
I'll just add a little bit onto what Prasad has said as well, which I think kind of lends itself well to thinking about phased approaches to these types of things, because that's what all this technology and innovation is about streamlining, the introduction or the implementation part of things as well. So if there could be some level of collaboration that allows for people to learn while things are being advanced, while new data sets are coming into play, that really helps with that transition as well. And I think we've seen a lot of, I think it was on one of the first panel as well, talking about some of the changes coming from the FCA that are looking about trying to provide more levels of transparency, provide more diversity when it comes to listing. And a lot of these things are about how do we utilize data and technology to enable that kind of capabilities to happen. And I think one of the spaces particularly that we're looking at when it comes to regulatory frameworks where we see opportunity for innovation would be in these types of regulations that are looking at relationships between investors and the market, between where capital is being allocated. How do we utilize technology to really track the information that's kind of working through that? So things like mapping of data entities, looking at things that I guess, uncover things like greenwashing, because you can run into those kind of issues if you transition too quickly. So those are, I think it kind of really plays into the point that you added there as well.
So I'm going to...
If I may add, I think, so there is an element, and you mentioned the regulators trying to play catch up in the past. There is an element of investment. So often the regulators may not have the same means to invest, to understand, and therefore adopt a new technology. But that's why I think the key word here is coordination, and that's why, going back to my initial point, you have to learn from others. Sometimes the bilateral fora, that the EU-UK Forum of Financial Services, is a very useful tool to exchange ideas on that and get best practices. There are similar fora with the US in this triangle EU, US, UK. There are some bilateral ways to collaborate on specific topics. I think AI has picked up everyone's imagination because of its potential transformative effect. Then you look at groups, excuse me, like IOSCO, the formation of an AI group already. So I think the contribution of regulatory and supervisory bodies through these bilateral fora or through these multilateral organizations, I think is crucial. And essentially, if you look at what IOSCO has been doing, the standards that, under which we operate as a financial market infrastructure were set, the PFMIs, by CPMI IOSCO in 2012 to be adaptable standards, and they can still apply with tweaks in what technology could bring today. And I think that talks to the success of those standards. They were a global set of principles for CCPs, CSDs to operate, and now they're just tweaked, specific principles or some of their concepts are tweaked to adapt to the challenges of the new technologies. And if you think about it, the PFMIs have been a very successful set of international standards agreed for different products, different asset classes across jurisdictions. So we should not forget that there are some elements of like global coordination or international coordination that could happen and bring some benefits. And then every region can just focus on how they want to utilize specific technologies. And I think the UK has been traditionally very active on those groups. And I think the UK and the European Union also, regulators, have been doing a great job at these groups.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just speaking to regulators more broadly, they're all looking to the likes of IOSCO to, especially on the AI side, to set some of those detailed standards. So I agree. I mean, they have, the likes of IOSCO now seem, especially in the technology side, seem to have quite an important role to deliver along with industry on standards. I'm conscious of time. I just wanted to give the audience a chance to ask any questions live, or I can go to some of the online questions. No? Okay. I'll come back to you in a minute. Maybe I'll ask you one of the online questions on AI, which I think applies more broadly to other technologies. Do you agree with the EU AI Act's prescriptive approach, or do you prefer kind of soft principles approach to AI very specifically, but maybe new technologies more broadly? Any quick reactions on that? From an implementation perspective, prescriptive rules versus soft rules, what do you prefer? What clarity do you need to really drive some of these technologies through your organizations?
I think it depends on the type of organization you are. So if you're developing a product that needs to be multi-jurisdictional, you will probably have to adhere to the strictest of the rules and regulations that are out there. But if you're within just one market where the flexibility is there, then you could build to that. But purely from a product development point of view, I think even from a technology clarity point of view, having both those perspectives are very useful because it allows you to understand, okay, what's the zone in which I need to operate. Certain zones of gray are useful because that's where some real innovation could actually happen as well. So yes, I mean, would you want to have something very clear and defined and prescriptive as the EU Act? It tells you what the high water mark is. But at the same time, do you want something that allows you the flexibility of a standards-based approach because it allows you to do certain types of things in a particular way? Then yes, that is useful as well. But it depends on what is it that you're trying to build out of it. Are you trying to deliver a service in a certain jurisdiction for the benefit of certain group of customers, you may find that in certain protected customer groups, the same restrictive things could well apply even where there is standards-based approach. So I think they're both trying to approach it from two slightly different angles, but I think the objectives of those outcomes remain similar. So from a product developer perspective, yeah, you need to be mindful of who are your target customers that you're trying to reach out and what protections do those customer bases have that you have to adhere to within the service that you're offering them. So I like the combination of both.
That's great.
Just
makes me
no, go on.
I was just going to say, it just makes me think of one of the particular challenges in that space, which I think maybe this is trying to address as well, is around the security aspect as well, right? So with any of these, a lot of these AI solutions out there are open source, and you know, what is the security risk that we inherently attribute to that, because that's the type of technology that's been integrated. So maybe those things are potentially going to address that as well by having those kind of standards and rules in place.
Which is a nice segue into another online question, which is, with both AI and quantum, how do we best deal with the bad state actor risk? And how should government and regulators, which is another question, but I think it goes well together, how should government and regulators respond to inevitable AI failures? So I mean, clearly, bad actors are now fighting with AI, but also can now maybe, you know, have more windows of weakness to manipulate as well. So any preliminary thoughts?
I can just give a sort of more high-level view, and just if I can comment on the AI Act prescriptiveness. Inevitably, I think the European Union, through this act, will have to go to a sectorial approach, one way or another. Last week, if I'm not wrong, the Commission launched a sort of consultation how AI is used in financial services, and it just broken it down per market segment, bank, asset management, market infrastructure, because there are different challenges there. And like with every adoption of new technology, the challenges are different to different markets, different segments, different asset classes. So that's one point. And the second point on resilience, let's say cyber resilience, I think the framework, as I've mentioned, is there. In the EU, we have DORA, which is a fairly prescriptive framework. In the UK, we have this critical third-party framework, which is a bit more flexible and principles-based. But the end result is the same, I think, or would be the same, because we're talking about institutions who are, you know, across the channel looking to have similar solutions, and they have similar clients, and probably they have similar threats from similar actors. So I think there is a commonality element there. The framework itself actually should work, in my humble opinion, to address AI concerns, because it was built in a technology-agnostic fashion, or can be tweaked to do that. So again, cloud was the main reason, cloud computing was the main reason that DORA was built in the EU, and I think the CTP framework here, but it could accommodate other technologies and threats in other technologies. But that's my opinion.
Anything else to add?
I think, I mean, it just highlights the other need, which is on certain topics, especially when it comes to the sanctity of the market infrastructures itself that we have created. On certain topics, global collaboration is going to be an absolute necessity, because to your point as well, I mean, some of the threats are the same, some of the bad actors are the same. And it's not just a threat to one country, and I think we live in a very interconnected economy as well. So a massive attack on one nation could well kind of have a knock-on impact to many other countries that have trade relationships. So on certain topics which are big enough like this, I think global collaboration is absolutely essential. And I think to a large extent, all the work that we have done with cloud third-party risk, DORA, it's shown that with the right intent, with the right convening, we can achieve some common purpose and outcome there. I think that just needs to kind of get tested. I think just augmenting your point, which is it needs to get tested out with what we can do with AI and potentially with quantum in the not too distant future, because I think both of these technologies will certainly call for that level of collaboration. Because in terms of raw power of who has access to what, I think over time there might be some concentrations that would develop. And I think it's important to have that global collaboration to ensure that the right thing gets done at that basic level without kind of impinging into the areas that could be deeply competitive for industries or sectors or specific industries.
Thank you. And if I could come to you, Maryse, I mean, earlier in the day, people talked about the transition to net zero and sustainability. How can technology be used to drive that? Are there any additional tips or things to think about that you want to leave the audience with?
I mean, I think a lot of this is about transparency and being able to really understand where you are, what actions you need to take to get to where you need to be, and what are the strategic implementations that you need to think about in order to get that in there. And in order to answer a lot of those questions, you need to have access to data. So making sure that you are really kind of thinking about what are the types of information that are required to be able to make those effective assessments. There's a lot of stakeholder management that's involved in that process as well, so providing that level of transparency in the information that you're collecting and being able to provide. And I think just, you know, utilizing things like scenario analysis, predictive models, wherever those can be implemented to help with that forward-thinking assessment, I think that that would be a good thing to start thinking about how can those things be implemented.
And can financial services and related professional services help to give you that good quality data, which is obviously the fuel for technology to work effectively?
Yeah, so I'm, you know, a lot of our clients are thinking about how can we start to collect this information in an effective way that will allow us to get informed decision making out of it. And there is the internal exercise, I think, about kind of finding the information, making sure that it's in an accurate and normalized and useful format. But then there's also these other parties that can add and complement that data as well. So being able to kind of marry the two, the external perspective, the internal perspective. And I think financial services is very much driving that as the, you know, investors into this space, the capital allocators in this space, they are driving those types of conversations and coming to vendors like us to see how we can help support that.
Great. Final call for any audience questions? Yeah, I know lunch is calling. So let me put out a final question. This whole morning and this conference is about driving growth. So your final thought on if there's one thing that financial services and related professional services can do to drive growth and harness the power of new technologies, what's the one thing you'd like to leave them with?
I think two words that come to mind is like collaboration and standards. They will need to have some sort of collaborative solutions because all of the stuff that we discuss, whether it's the cyber threat or there is a challenge in adoption of a specific technology, I cannot speak about quantum because I barely understand it, but I can kind of comment on the other technologies. I think need a collaborative approach, and collaboration means all industry and also with the supervisors and the regulatory community, and eventually the politicians who have to understand the technical nature of these topics and the risks and challenges. And standards, because we cannot develop something for mass adoption by an industry, let's say, without having some common basis for that.
Elena?
So for me in banking, I think it will be about upskilling the workforce. And I don't necessarily mean about everybody becoming a data scientist. I think it's more about the broader workforce understanding how they play a part in an AI-augmented organization. And I think a lot of that will come down to, first of all, innovation, which I think we sometimes forget is a skill, but it is, and it's going to be an important skill as we start using AI. And then also just going back to that adoption point, ensuring that the organization knows how to use the AI and knows how to use it most effectively.
I won't repeat what they have said, but one additional thing, I think it's important for people to accept that there is a need to experiment and perhaps experiment safely at scale. There's a lot of rapid learning that comes with it, which will then inform the organization's appetite to take that further into scaled adoption. So I think the ability for organizations to understand what they can experiment, how quickly they can experiment, how safely they can experiment is going to be super critical.
Lastly, I think I would echo what you said as well, which is the word collaboration. There's so many parts of this puzzle and it requires everybody's input and all types of people's input to be able to make that happen. And I think we need to ensure that we create space to be able to allow that to take place. So that collaboration effort, and I think data is going to be a very key source of input to all of those outputs being successful.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, I think some of those themes around the role of financial services and related professional services to drive the collaboration and standards, but also upskilling and experimentation, I think will be key to harnessing the power of those new technologies. I want to thank my panel for sharing their thoughts today, and I'll close the panel and let you all go and have some lunch. Thank you.